Hello. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the City Open Seminar. Good morning, Christoph. Good morning, Christina, our two special guests today. And first of all, as Platon explained, I will introduce Christoph, and thereafter we will introduce Christina at the scheduled 11:30 session. As I just chatted to Christoph and the team before, I had the good fortune of having seen some of ifau's work in Berlin, and to hear of the processes that's been driven to realize these projects. And often I wonder, wow, these projects are very different to what is going on in the mainstream. How is it possible? And ifau is absolutely affirmative to that question. And to get to know ifau and their collaborators' way of working often radically expand the horizon of architectural practice out of the box, so to speak. Their deeply collaborative endeavor have taken on such diverse roles socially, financially, politically, and artistically, putting on hats as developers, as creators, as mediators, planners, and managers, roles that were previously segregated professionally. They have pushed the meaning of an architectural project out of the traditional straitjacketed definition. A project becomes not only a stage of empowerment for all those involved, but it literally becomes a form of life, of co-thinking, of co-acting, of co-producing, and co-living. Projects become life transformers, social condensers, and collaborative creations. And in this absolutely extraordinary and challenging times, we are grateful that Christoph Schmidt from ifau can be here virtually to share with us their experiences in responding to the more and more urgent needs to reinvent architectural practices and architects as critical, creative, and effective agencies. Thank you, Christoph. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Doreen. Thank you, Platon. Thank you, Christina. Thank you all for inviting me and having this very nice introduction. It's an honor for me also to represent our work in this format with your seminar. And I tried now to share my screen. Yeah, as I has been introduced already from Doreen, our main goal in the way we work together in a group of people. Now we are in the office like eight people working together. We started being like 3 or 4, and sometimes we are 10, but now we are 8. Always to work on a very collaborative way. So everyone has projects to be involved. Everybody is sharing also the projects of the other ones. And I took this title because that maybe represents the work mostly, because we have been always interested in the way spaces can be negotiated, and how we as architects can also provide spaces to be also negotiated on the level. So I start this lecture with a small introduction, also not to be too concise with the actual situation, but to see how maybe historically the people were somehow always occupied with the question of how to negotiate the space. And so this is the house I'm broadcasting now from. Maybe you have seen that at all. I will not talk about the R50 co-housing project, but I will explain or present another project. But let's start with some interesting diagrams I found recently, again when I was looking in a fantastic catalog about an exhibition about the work of Konstantinos Doxiadis, a famous Greek Athens-based urban planner from the 1960s. And it is so interesting. He was at this time, like now you can say like 70 years ago, or he was occupied with the question like, what kind of influence we as architects have on the built environment. And you see there on the left, above this cone, and where he's describing in the end, like that we maybe are just involved into processes as architects, like about 40% of the building work is somehow we are related to. On the right, you see a black spot in the middle of this egg-shaped, scrambled eggs, or was mirror eggs shape image or diagram. This black spot, this is the full architectural performance. So it's a very, very small spot, and then you see around this small black spot some areas which are somehow architectural work. This is the light gray one, and then there's the dark gray one is some mixed forms of architectural production and building production in general, and the white is the white fringe is showing there is no influence of architecture at all in terms of the building work. And on the bottom you see the diagram, which you can see the way you can see there's on the top line is the misunderstanding architecture, and the middle line with the gray shade area underneath is architects who are influencing the architecture, and where you see like the checkerboards, black and white on the bottom is representing projects who have been made from architecture. You see, every time when we talk about negotiating space is that the influence of architects is less than 50%, and I think it did not really change the years over, although it is like 70 years now ago when Konstantinos Doxiadis made these observations, and so we have to be also aware that we as architects are always in a world which is also built in a totally different way as we maybe in our academic conceptions we think of that the world should be. Coming back now a little bit earlier, this plan, maybe you know, is from Giovanni Battista Noli, when he has been asked by the Pope of Rome to redraw the city, to make a map, an actual map of the city in the 18th century. And he was not so interested in to just draw the roads and the buildings. And he had this fantastic invention to show all the white spaces are public spaces. So it's not only the roads, not only the squares, but it's also the inside of churches and insides of temples and insides of public buildings, which are interconnected with the roads, interconnected with the piazzas and the squares. So this is a drawing which I find always so fascinating to see, where you draw the line as an architect, which spaces you declare as being public, which spaces you declare as being negotiable, which I think it's in our days a question. It's a very old drawing, you can say, but it shows our way of or possibilities to interpretate these spaces in the way we think, in the conceptual way they should be negotiated. Let's go a bit even more into history. This is maybe you know this Diocletian palace in Croatia, in Dalmatia. It's the palace of Diocletian, an emperor, a Roman emperor, who came from this area, and he was thinking, okay, I try to do my power representation directly where I come from. And so it came to this palace in Dalmatia. This is an illusion. something like illustration, you can say, how this palace should look like. Or it was near the border of the Adriatic Sea, and you can see also how it is made. Like I come back one, like the typical way a Roman settlement is always with this cross, and you have these two roads, right, from east, from west to east, and from north to south, and then the crossing in the middle, and then you have these four quarters. The very ancient way of how is the city being built, and also a palace is being built. And then something happened when the emperor died. There was no need for another Roman emperor to reuse this, or to go on with the use of this palace. And so the people who were living around or next to this palace, they made their settlements within the palace. So there comes the old town now from Split, you can see, where this palace became a city. So, which I find very interesting in terms of question of scale, when we talk about spaces to negotiate. So it's a palace which becomes a city then in the end, or the question when it starts to become a building, or when it starts to become a city, when you talk about architectural and spatial negotiations. You can see the actual look of the city, the aerial view from Split. Next, also it's a bit, but there were also some more observations, like in the 20th century, in the beginning of the 20th century, where some scientists were just looking for what kind of built elements were also helping for the settlements. So the whole city wall has become a wall, a backdrop, and a back wall for other settlements outside the palace. So it's interesting to see how this culture of how people used spaces again, and how they were reused in terms of the reuse of built elements like the city wall has a so long tradition, and so everything is negotiable in this sense. So come then make this a big step to Rome, where you can see these aqueducts, where people are living next to or underneath and try to find ways to live. So it's still something, when you go to Rome, you see these consular streets, the consular roads, where all the water supply comes into the city in forms of these aqueducts. You always see people living within these arches or in front of these arches. And so there were all kind of poor settlements in the beginning, but they became more and more like common. So infrastructures are also part of the question to be negotiated. So coming back to our days, so if we would start to negotiate our infrastructures in a new way, like roads, like highways or whatever, which may be in the question of the change of mobility, could be also new spaces in towns where new city developments and new housing projects could take place. So that is maybe the question also in these dense city contexts of European cities, which have maybe no spaces, but there are spaces. And for instance, the question of an aqueduct and a road, which will be changed into a smaller road, will also provide more space for living. And it's also interesting, like when we talk about the negotiation of space, is we always have in mind that we are talking about the bottom-up strategies, like the people have this this need or this inner pressure to organize themselves, to become groups, and also to protest against all these problems of not being able to finance the way how to live in the city. But it has been also a question of a kind of a top-down strategy as well. So for instance, the King of France, when he started to expand the city of Paris in the Baroque way, there were some squares like this Place Vendôme has been erected. And I think also in London was the same, where you just provide this public space and these facades around this public space. And the land behind these facades will be sold out or given to cooperatives to build behind these facades in a totally different way. So it's also a question of, okay, what is the interface you want to share to negotiate? When you see this is a very strong method of providing the public space and to also provide this certain way of an interface to this public sphere, and then to have in the behind the opportunity to think about different ways of living, forms of living. These are all historical examples, but they show that there can be more when we consider our way. So I would want to engage you to consider maybe methods of ancient times to see what kind of methods could maybe fit to find new ways and new spaces in the city to be negotiated. So, but there are also examples of where architects were engaged, for instance, here, Candilis, Josic, and Woods, when they built in the colonial way in North Africa, in Algiers and in Morocco and in Algeria. Well, in the 60s, 50s, 60s, the European elite architects of the modernism which were kind of very strongly related to the Siam congresses, and they had the test field in the colonial states of North Africa, like from France and also from Britain, where they had a big test field of bringing in modern architecture, modern structural architecture within these contexts, and to have the opportunity to have this climate also to test different ways of architectural performances. But if you then look 50 years later, the people, they have adopted these spaces, and that is also an interesting part of the architectural thinking, is how we can provide structures which can be negotiated. That was maybe not meant by the architects, by Josic, Candilis, and Woods, that they will fill, the people will fill the interspaces, the interstitial spaces between the balconies with bricks and making small holes inside to keep out, to black out the sunlight and the heat of this climate. But it also works. It's a fantastic example to see how structures can be modified, can be negotiated afterwards when the architect has left the scene. Another example, also a colonial or like a late colonial building, is where from Fernand Pouillon in Algiers, where you had the very, very, very beautiful big, like when you just compare that to the Diocletian Palace, the idea of building an architecture between the city and a building, and had this really, really huge courtyard in mind with some ideas of a market and a meeting place. And that is used today, like it's a parking lot. But it has a resistancy, its robustness, this space, to also imagine that even in these countries or even in these contexts, maybe the car will be kicked out of this courtyard, and then it could be also like a green or like a market or a meeting courtyard as well. So it's also about a certain robustness of architectural elements, architectural structures we provide can be changed by the users, can be changed by different activities, which we can't foresee that from now. One of these very heroic projects, but I think it's not only about this scale. Is the Fort Emperor, the Plan Aubuche from Le Corbusier in Algiers, where the idea was to have the infrastructure of a road and underneath some stories which can be also filled by villas and gardens. The idea of Le Corbusier to say like, okay, why we should waste the land? We could also follow one line, just aligning the coastline, and have this idea of the urban villas. You can see the double height villas, and you have the slabs, and then on the top of the building is the road. So it's maybe it's a very heroic, it's a very utopian project, but it has the elements also of what kind of type of negotiation you will provide for people to be engaged. So you can also imagine somehow he did it that there will be more like vernacular ways of doing infills within these slabs. So you have also the modern style here. You can see the two-story, the urban villa with the garden next to it. You know that project also from the urban villa from Le Corbusier. And then you can see also the very the vernacular style. You can see like this is maybe made out of materials and forms and ornaments which are more connected to the context of Algiers. And then you have also these public corridors. So it's also a question like what kind of structures, or what kind of grid structures we can invent, which can be filled in. So then we come then to the question of the support structure and the infill structure. This you can maybe imagine from images, or maybe you have been there to one of the walkways in Le Corbusier's Unité d'Habitation in Marseille, where you can see, okay, it's also a question of how you can introduce, how you can infill also, or insert a certain way of publicness into the building, so that the city will come also into the building. So the dream of Le Corbusier can be also still alive, that to bring the public really into the building. I come now to a project we have worked for 8 years in Berlin. It's called the Integratives Bauprojekt am ehemaligen Blumengroßmarkt. It's a German title. I just translated it like not literally, but to understand it's a residential and studio and atelier building at the former Berlin Flower Market, where we joined together with another architectural office we also worked with for the R50 co-housing project, Heide and Van Beckerath. And we're also partners with a cooperative, which is called the Selbstbaugenossenschaft Berlin, and a cooperative from the 1980s, which were somehow engaged also in architectural experimental buildings in Berlin. Not so much, but there were like a few, but they were always very interested in new forms of living and how the people can organize themselves into these kind of processes. But the question was now how we can finance this, because the cooperative directly right from the beginning said, maybe we are in a time, it was like in 2012, 2013, the land prices, they were rising more and more, and the cooperative couldn't really afford to buy the land to give a certain fixed price for the rent for the members of the cooperative. So they couldn't really guarantee that. And they said, like, if we will be part of this project, we have to make sure that we can guarantee a price of, I say it in €9 per square meter for the people who rent apartments there. So an initial concept has been made to see. That has been a big plot. You see that on the front is the balcony side, the south side of the building. So it was definitely clear that we have to really densify this situation to make as much as possible in terms of investment, and to say, okay, let's calculate how many of the flats and how many spaces, how many apartments, how many ateliers could be held by the cooperative. And then we were thinking, okay, let's try to or just co-finance the system of a cooperative with owners, ownership-based community. So like a typical co-housing project, combined or just mixed with a cooperative project. And we came up that there was a number like about like 30% could be held by the cooperative, and the rest, the 65% to 70%, has to be co-financed by ownership-based community. And that was really like the experiment. It was not the architecture from the beginning. It was more the way it is financed. Here you can see the plot. You see in the middle is the flower market. We are now in the south part. That was the land we had to apply for, and it is interestingly, maybe also for you to know, as maybe some of you becoming urban planners as well. That the city of Berlin offered at this time land for conceptual-based biddings. So the best concept should be taken or should be chosen, and that will reduce also the cost for the land. So the city would give land away for a cheaper price if the concept will allow for more social and more use for the neighborhood, for more environmental considerations. That was in 2012, 2013. I think even today, the city of Berlin would not offer to give the land away. They would only give it today on the base of leasehold. And I think there had also been the case for here, but it was on the edge where it has been politically discussed. So this project is a bidding with a concept based. You can see here on the opposite the extension of the Jewish Museum Berlin from Daniel Liebeskind. Maybe you have been there and you know it. So it's a quite like globally seen a very a hot spot of Berlin. You can see here on the north corner fantastic buildings from the International Building Exhibition in Berlin in the 1980s, from 1984 to 1987. You can see blocks, a museum. So I think there has been a lot of ideology. So if you once come to Berlin, take your time to go in the southern Friedrichstadt, and you will find so many different ideologies of urban planning and city development in a sectional way, in terms of like 100 years of concurring ideologies, and this ideology around or to develop the area around the former flower market was to offer plots for projects which have a certain interest in terms of a social co-financing or social benefiting project for the whole area. You can see a new square has been invented by the urban plan. There are 3 projects who were like realized in a way that there has been a certain benefit. This is a not a co-housing, but more like a co-working group. It's like a start-up project for firms, and to offer the firms, startup firms, companies, opportunities to get a place in the inner district of the city, and also to provide space for working. This project is the Metropolitan House, is providing space in the ground floor, which can be used and also rent out for a cheap way for people around here in the whole area. This flower, or the old flower market, has been changed into an extension of the Jewish Museum in Berlin. There were seminar rooms, and this is our project here. This is the IBEB project, where we had right from the beginning the question how we can address also to different needs, and to the question of how we make the city there. And we were thinking of being a bit more productive and not to just expose the ground floor for public use, but to say maybe it's also interesting to live and to work on this level, and to come back to the idea of production in the city, to come back to the idea of that people can work and live on the ground floor, and providing atelier spaces for people who work, live in the city. Here you can see also this co-financing idea. You have the gray squares. This is the classical co-housing group, is the ownership-based group, and then they are there in a what's it called, like in a relation of 2 to 1. And the green, this is the cooperative, and they co-financing the project from the cooperative, because, or no, in the way that the cooperative had not to buy the land, but the land has been bought by the private owners. So each member or each square meter of ownership-based building has been co-financing the potential or the ability that the cooperative is able to finance the project to a third part. And then the yellow ones is also was part of the concept, which is also done today, is a social carrier, which is providing space at nowadays 10 apartments for people with the disabilities in terms of their deaf people. And then we have, like, the rest is the classical mix we know, but not so big, as being like for bar and cafe or a shop. And that was the envelope of the building. So it was quite clear we have to put the maximum in the envelope, a maximum into the lines of what is allowed to build on this plot, to have a maximum of economy to make it possible that the cooperative will be part of the building. So it's a very dumb and dull volume. It's part of the urban scheme, of the urban layout. And we said, like, okay, you could also think of 2 or 3 buildings within this frame, but it is also necessary to know that the height have been restricted or have been limited by the Jewish Museum on the other side. So you couldn't make any higher buildings. So then we were deciding, okay, let's take the maximum of the envelope, the maximum of the volume, and to introduce a more public, a more efficient system of circulation, of accessibility. And here you can see two staircases. One in the back is the east one, and then in the front is the west one. And then they're connected by horizontal corridors or external corridors or a roof street. You can see on the top of the roof street. In the middle, there's a main corridor. It's also connected to the idea of what Le Corbusier with the Rue Intérieure was trying to bring some more public within the building. And then you see an exterior corridor facing the south facade. Here you can see the three projects, and luckily we won also together with the cooperative. We won this bidding procedure, and we could realize this yellow building in the front, and could kick out some investors who wanted to build there a hotel, and they say, okay, it's also like a way of work and live, and but it was strong enough, the project conceptually, that it could really beat some classical investors who were able to pay a lot more for the land than the group would have been able to pay. And then it was also conducted with the surveillance of the city. So we have, on the one hand, we have the top-down control system. You can see in the middle Louisa Hutton from Sauerbruch and Hutton, the famous office here in Berlin. And in the top you see the town planner from the district of Kreuzberg in Berlin. He was also very engaged that this project can be happened. So it was also interesting that it was not only like a bottom-up strategy that the people put their money together or their efforts together, like a cooperative wanting to be extending their stock of apartments, and then also private people want to have a secure way to live in the city and even can afford to live in the city, but only for a certain amount. But it's also the city, it's the Senate of Berlin, it's the district planners, so the top-down mode who really were engaged into this process. So we had on the one hand always every 6 weeks meetings with the local authorities, with an external commission of experts, and we were talking about the architecture and the urban layout of the building. Remember, to the King of France, what is the public space worth what has a building to give to the public sphere? And the other motif was also to work with the people that they can get to know each other. And there were also a lot of interesting projects taking place on the place, like flea markets, games, and even social games, because it was a big building with 90 parties, and you couldn't really know them. The people didn't know each other from the beginning, and it was not a bottom-up, rising-up community, but it was also people coming from any places, any ways of occupation, and any ways of social and economical background. So there were people who just wanted to rent, and people who could afford, and then they wanted to share, but they had to know. So there's one big thing in these co-housing projects. I think that will Christina later on also carry on, is that the people right from the beginning start to get to know each other, which I think it's one of the biggest values of these kind of projects. And then we have this lively we had these discussions about how to make the ground floor level as a lively urban vital zone with ateliers, with retail or some shops. Here we had the first ideas of how a double height space can be provided in the ground floor level. So to see that you might also can live within these places and you work in these places, because this area of the city is although it is right in the center, is not a commercial area. It's if you would try to find people to open their shop or a bar, it would be really problematic, because the city is not so developed as, for instance, like in London, where you have so many hotspots in the city. Berlin is quite deregulated in certain areas, and this area is mainly driven by housing and not by commercial and cultural use. Besides the two museums, here you can see what kind of accessibilities we try to introduce into the project. That maybe an exterior corridor could also help to make a double height atelier to become more flexible also in the future, as to maybe to cut the upper part of a 2-story high atelier into maybe a private space to live in, and the place on the ground level to also be or still be an office or something like a shop. And then we have the question of, because if we build the whole building as being like the footprint of the whole plot, we have to provide also some garden spaces and to exterior spaces, which has also been introduced into the architecture itself. So we have the roof street, where you have the possibility to have another access corridor en plein air, in the air, just without any roof, and there you have access to different cubes for ateliers also, and to work and to live, and a garden. And that is maybe the crucial thing, is how to organize that all. And this section shows maybe most what happens if you see that you are here on the ground level. This is the ground level where you have a double height ateliers, and on the other side, to the south side, we also just put the ateliers also into the souterrain. So you have a souterrain and ground level atelier. As you know that also from London, it was really hard for the Berliners to accept an atelier which is sunken into the earth with a small courtyard in front. But now you will see that later on these type of ateliers are very, very effective. And then we have introduced here on the level of this you see like nearly 2-story height atelier spaces on the ground floor, this called split level or mezzanine, to provide even more studio spaces, which are also externally connected via this external corridor. And then from this line here, you see there starts the housing part, which is the first floor with the rue intérieure, with this corridor, which is also connecting the second floor with, on the one hand, adjacent to the corridor, some stairs, and also internal staircases within, to have a duplex situation. So we have then on the first floor smaller apartments facing south with a balcony, and then you have like double height or just 2-story apartments in the north, and just connected on the second floor to the south with a balcony. This depth of the building that has been also provided by, or has been caused by the urban layout of the urban plan, which is interestingly, a depth of the building about like 28 meters, which is normally not bad for office blocks, to have maybe then a combined zone in the middle with all the infrastructure, and then you have office spaces on the south and the north side. But to really introduce living in there, or housing, we had to invent this kind of very effective access or just the circulation system. And then on the rooftop, you have the roof street, what you can see there before, and there are on the 4th floor are the roof ateliers, and they're also connected downstairs with the stairs to the 3rd floor. So this was just architectural to provide different modes of connections, different modes of combinations. And then the people came and say, okay, let's try to find my personal way of how to work, live in this structure. And so we started with just 3 or 4 different types, and we ended up with 35 different apartment atelier combinations. So in the end, there were like 70 apartment and work-live combination units, which you can see here. And we started with 3. And that was maybe the most hilarious part, which we had to discuss with the group, with the co-housing group, with the cooperative, what is affordable, what is what the people need. And so you could see that here on this diagram, how many different types of work-live situations we could provide. And then you can see, as our part as architect, to become very, very constructive again, and to have this, I don't know the English expression, when you have just built it with walls in a row. This is a typical, you see that here, structure. We built that. We wanted to build it all in wood, but that was really too expensive. So we decided on the not so eco-friendly way to build it with concrete slabs. And these concrete slabs or concrete walls is the inner ratio, the inner system of this building, which is somehow connected to the idea of the unité d'habitation, but also with courtyards inside. So we introduced here connected. You could see that in the section with the Rue Intérieure. We had also introduced a courtyard where 2 apartments are sharing one courtyard and the light, to make also the inner part of the apartment to become also a place which can be interpreted by the user. So it's not as in the unité d'habitation, where Corbusier just put the bathrooms and some storage spaces, but we have also here light in the very middle of the apartment. So that is also a question, how you as an architect provide space to negotiate by the user. And then we have these meetings with the people. We had some containers on the site, like in the beginning, where we had huge discussions. This was one of the early discussions we had to meet. Then we had sessions with the people when they had the choir. We had music sessions. We had a cafe there where the people tried to get in contact also with the neighborhood. There were also people coming from the neighborhood were being engaged into the project. Some of the neighborhoods, they run the cafe then in the end. And these are some images from the rising of the building. You can see some, just briefly, some excerpts of the way the units could be combined. You could see that here on the yellow marked area in the building. Here the gray in the spot in the middle is the Rue Intérieure, and then you can see this apartment on the 1st floor is connected with a smaller studiolo. We call that studiolo. There's a half of a studio, which is connected with a part where you can work in. And this is also then connected outside with this exterior walkway. So this is a unit which is about like 61 square meters with an internal staircases. And then you have a bigger one. This is what I showed in the section. You have then to north a 2-story apartment, and then just facing also southward with a balcony, which is about like 120 to 132 square meters. So this is same on the roof. You can see then you have a smaller part on the 4th floor, and then you go down into the 3rd floor, and then it's from north to south. The whole apartment is also lit by north, by south, and also by the courtyard, which also, yeah, was interesting that most people that they wished to put their kitchen in this part. We never said it's obligatory to put the kitchen there, but the people wanted to put the kitchen there. So we had with every user individual consultancies, how many separate rooms you want to have, how many bathrooms you need. Is one part of the flat meant to be as a working space, or is it separated working space? Is it an atelier? You can see also in the model again, maybe a bit better, but more like structurally how it is introduced. All these types of spaces you can see here. This is the ground floor level. This is the souterrain level with a courtyard. Then this is this part of the mezzanine, and then you have the 1st floor with the idea of the rue intérieure, which is connected with staircases, also from the flats from exterior and interior. Some images you could see, like when it was finished, you could see that it's a very from outside it's a very strong, or like maybe a severe logic of bringing the public space as being a very anonymous way of living in the city, like coming back to Louis XV or like 15 from France, when he made his planners thinking of the Place Vendôme. You could see that here. So it's a very urban house. It's not so, because that is also part of the negotiation process. The group was really thinking of to have a very strong and also very anonymous facade to the square. Here you can see the exterior walkway, where the ateliers are also connected on the mezzanine level. You can see on the right side the extension of the Jewish Museum from Daniel Liebeskind. This is the courtyard, which is bringing light into the souterrain ateliers, and above you see that walkway, this exterior walkway. And then this is a souterrain atelier, as I said. It's a fantastic space to have a very contemplative way of living and working there. This is a ground floor atelier with what's it called, a gallery on the level of mezzanine. It was also meant that the people could really have this space to build them to build the gallery on their own, but the most people they forced us as architects to also invent their proper idea of a gallery, and so we have so many galleries as well. So it doubled also again the amount of different ateliers, because everybody wanted to have the staircase in a different position. Here you can see some wanted to have a glass wall, just separating the upper level from the 2-story high level. It's a painter here inside. And then is the rue intérieure. You can see which is connected from the light. You can see there with the courtyards bringing light into the in the center of the building. Here was the like a ceremony with the Arc Plus magazine, where we could meet also in this very, very long corridor. And I think it's the longest common space we have ever seen. It's like 100 meters long. It's 3 meters wide. And we had some very, very nice evenings there inside. There were a flea market 2 times in a year. There's a flea market where the people just put their tables into this corridor, and then the public can walk through the building and meet in the rue intérieure to share and to change items. And then we had a big meal there inside with long tables. Here you can see the courtyards, which meant to be green, but the problem is meant to be green, but it is was a question of costs. Now the people in the house, they put green plants there inside, but everything has been provided by us with water and drainage systems and so on and so on. This is the view into this small studiolo, which is connected with the apartment above, and this is one apartment like right in the middle of the building. Here you can see the very longitude of the length of the apartment, like about 24 meters long. And you can see we are now in the middle of the flat, and it is quite bright, and with a kitchen there inside. Here you can see. Staircase. And then these on the roof, you have these small courtyards between the atelier cubes on top of the building, like also for public or for the community, and as an entrance for those who are using the spaces. And then there was the ceremony of just handing over the building. And now you can see, and when you will come to Berlin, that these walls are green. So, and that is also maybe the last thing from the question of negotiation with the users. Is there were always these questions: why we shall we close the view to the Jewish museum, to the public sphere? And then the most people were deciding pro, because they said this is our garden, this is more like a hortus conclusus, where we are for ourselves, because we want to also not to offend the public sphere with our private way to live. And so they decided for this courtyard type of garden on the rooftop. So I think I leave it now to this, because I think it's now an hour to go. And I just want to open it maybe for questions.
Thank you, Christoph. Thank you. This was excellent. I don't know if there are any questions here to start.
I can't see the chat, I must say. This is my problem.
I cannot see it either, but they keep sending me questions from another chat. So we have a couple of questions from the YouTube channel, but I think I will open the floor here for questions first. Anyone?
Yes, hello, Christoph. I would have a question. Thank you for your presentation. I think the question that I had has to do something with the tools of mediation and communication that you potentially have while working with these different groups, especially also different age groups, as it seems like in these images that you showed. And the question is kind of going to the direction of these requests, which seem very custom made towards the needs of the first cycle of users of that building, in relation to a potential thing that you have in the back of your mind when it comes to a generic structure of the space itself, so that also the second cycle can adopt these structures to their own needs. And if you could maybe expand on that, would be great.
Yeah, I just maybe it's I think every time I talk about this project, it has a certain dynamic, because I lose always things which I have to mention earlier. But I mentioned one thing. It is that we have these two parts. We have the external pressure on the project, which you have to is related to the idea of having a strong partner at this site. Is the Jewish Museum of Berlin. It's a very, very known place. It's a very, even for Germany and for Berlin, it's a very respectful way we have to work with this organization. And there were so many restrictions also because of security. The Jewish museums are all Jewish buildings, or in Germany they are under protection of the police. So you have to really walk into in between lines of very restricted ways of an urban layout, which is has to be negotiated every time with the authorities, with the planners from the district and the Senate, and has to be negotiated also with the Jewish Museum. So the strong envelope, the strong layout of the urban conditions for the building, we try to convince right from the beginning the people that this is maybe something we have to accept and we should work with, and to try to find out ways of having the freedom in a different way. So there were also people like, okay, can't we do anything with the balconies? Can we do this? Can we do that? And I always say, like, yeah, it could be, but it will maybe give a lot of problems in terms of security, in terms of the urban layout. And then we were just thinking with some of the like for the cooperative right from the beginning, can we maybe find a solution of having on the one hand a building with a big depth of this 28 or 26 meters, and to provide a certain freedom of choice where people could really combine spaces and could really find their place in a house. And that were the conditions. And then it started that the people were directly accepting, and they were knowing that right from the beginning, okay, I'm right in the center of the city. I'm right next to the Jewish Museum. I will not provoke the public sphere with my private interest of having like I don't know, something super individual to the outside. So it was also interesting. Not us as architects were just providing this question of how to react on the public sphere. It was also the people themselves were saying, okay, you see everywhere cameras, and you see the CCTV situation there, and everything has been really restricted in a way. The public space is controlled by this kind of media and by the police and by the people themselves. You know, like even tourists walk in a different way on this square. It's interesting that we have this also in every context of the city. And so we were just directly confronted with the situation to every time communicate the results of these negotiations with the city back into the group. And the group were just accepting or were asking for more. And there were so many questions also like how the roof should be. And the roof, I could have shown some more images about the roof should, as from our part, could be much more of two-story high buildings again, because the law allowed for this kind of building type to have also on the top another two-story high ateliers. But it was also the cooperative was saying, no, we can't think of people having two-story high ateliers on the rooftop in the center of Berlin with a view onto the museum. Yeah. Nobody can afford this. So there was also something like a self-determination that the cooperative made a lot of efforts to convince also the ownership-based group or part of the group not to vote for a two-story high atelier building for Olafur Eliasson in Berlin, for example, but to say let's make it a bit more on a level that everybody can share this space as well. So there was the roof garden idea coming up, and also the idea of integrating the green, which was not built then in the end. Now they are the first tests of greenery inside. But then I think it was mostly about talking about what is common, what is public, and what is totally different to a project I'm living here now in the co-housing R50 project, is that the common spaces become smaller and smaller the bigger the group is, because everybody can count. If I want to share this space once in a year, maybe it's one time I can use this space. So the people were definitely not into voting for a common space which is like 100 or 200 square meters. Although a group could really use this kind of space, the common space as an interior space is just 60 square meters. And then we invented other spaces like the corridor, becoming more like a space where the people can meet. And I haven't got the photos with me, but it is also used as a rue intérieure for the youngsters, which are using that for skateboards, and the people are going with a bike directly from the lift to their apartment. So it's really like this interior road rue intérieure is something like which is a sharing point of like the heart of the building, where the people can see on the way, like Hermann Herzberger always was considering, to look out of your window and to see somebody crossing the street or just coming along. And there were also these questions like what are the common spaces are about, like the garden, the rue intérieure, and how also the bicycle spaces or the storages can be also made in this way, that you can easily screw all these just to take off the things where you put the bike in, and then you have a bigger space. So there are quite more smaller inventions inside, which I couldn't show in this time.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
There is a question from YouTube, from the YouTube chat, which I found very interesting, and I want to pass it to you, Christoph. There's a question from Ashif. He says, you have spoken clearly about the negotiation of inclusion, both inside and outside the building and the site. Now, in the light of social distancing, how can these negotiations be effective?
I think the community is very strong now, that they meet every day on the balcony, and I think it's like what I also have in my experiences, that these houses where the people know each other right from the beginning now, it took like six years to build up this house, that the people learned each other from the negative and the positive way. And so I think in this time of the social distancing, I think it's interesting that these communities are working quite well in terms of how can I say, rules which they have in their house, and they have the benefit from that they share so many things within this big house, and they have so many opportunities to meet each other either on the balcony or to have this shortcut through the Rue Intérieure, which I found very interesting when I met people there recently, and they said like, okay, it was really like to be on an ocean cruiser. Yeah. Does that make sense what I say?
Yes, thank you, Christoph. Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I have a couple of questions. One is related to the mass tourism and platforms such as Airbnb. And I was thinking of the city of Split and the Eclesian Palace, what you talked about in the beginning, and how overrun by tourist cities in the summer, and how the local people are literally being pushed out of the city, and especially out of that part, the central part. And the second one relates to the question about the spatial physical distancing and the question of the current crisis. Is there anything that you that has happened recently which would kind of change some of the aspects of the co-op housing, or do you think it's not, there isn't anything that fundamentally changes or would change any of the aspects of design or the way the space is used?
It's a good question. I think the first one is that the people who are now working or now in a process of a participatory projects, all participatory projects are not able to meet in this dense situation as we are all used to meet each other. So I think this social distancing makes it a bit more complicated, as I see that from process I'm in, and either it is a problematic to just have the video meeting. It has a certain intensity, like us now, we can really share on a very, very short way a conversation, but I think if you talk about these kind of processes you need for this, to build up these kind of community processes, you need maybe like 5-6 hours for an evening. You start at 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, and you stop at 12 o'clock in the night, and you have just half of the program, half of the agenda has been addressed to. This is the normal way, and just consider or just imagine that we would sit here like 5 hours to negotiate issues about how we want to live together. I think it's very complicated now in the moment, and I think a lot of groups are now suffering under these circumstances. Now it starts to become a bit more loose. We hope that we can meet groups now in a more distant way, but I think that will have an effect on, like, time-wise and content-wise, how much you can really negotiate, because even the physical situation where the people are upset, certain idea from the architect, or upset about a comment from somebody in the group, that is something you can't really live on the video platform, because we are all used now to be very polite in terms of how we use the way we talk, you know, like nobody, we are all switching off our mic, and so to have this very, very dense atmosphere. So, and in a way we have a dialogue now, the others have to really be respectful not to intervene with their microphone. And I think that has really an effect in terms of the planning and the negotiation situation. what does it mean in terms, like physically, like in terms of shared spaces, and what kind of effects that will have on the structural, on the design, and on the idea of how spaces can be used in common. I haven't got an idea really, because I think we are still on the mode of hope. We will find the vaccine, and then we will come over this, and then we will have this physically way of working in this way more in the way we are used to it again. But I'm not sure. Maybe that will have an effect, that the people in our house and in the other house, you have that problem, like you have that also maybe in your surrounding. There are people that are very strict with the regulations, and the others that are not so strict. And that is really something which has to be negotiated every time. And so, for instance, in the house I'm living in, where we have all these meetings every 3 months. So the last meeting was held also on video based. So, but it took like an hour, and then everybody was annoyed and said, okay, let's stop that now. We can't talk so much about this situation now. And meanwhile, we have a 150 square meters big space downstairs, but there were people said, I don't go in this space with so many people. And now we can sit outside in the garden or whatever. But I think this is a process we have to learn maybe more and more. And how long? And maybe it's also a question how long this crisis will go on. And then I had this also in the morning we had the discussion, like what I find in the moment very, very problematic is all the groups who are just engaging themselves with the capital of social impact. They have problems now because they don't have the money to just to finance a campaign, because they have to meet each other. All the protest forms are in danger in the moment, like because you're not allowed to be more than 20 person on the street, and if you do a protest. And so on the one hand, it's maybe a question of very creative moments, but then on the one hand, it's also very restricted in the way we communicate. Does it give you an answer to your question?
Yes, I think in terms of the physical space, it seems that at the current situation, it kind of belongs to people who, I guess, have less respect for the rules. So people, because if you're having to, and what happens is that spaces that are supposed to be shared and are being used by, people who don't necessarily respect the rules, and people who do are excluded out, or they exclude themselves out because simply they don't want to risk. So I think it might actually cause more private spaces, and especially spaces like balconies, green spaces, and spaces with views, because that's one of the kind of interesting things that happened with all these even video projections, like cinema screenings on side of buildings, and or musicians performing. As long as you have the view, you have a sense of kind of connecting, even though it might be, but you are in your own personal private space. So, thank you.
Thank you, Nirma. Are there any other questions? Christina, Raul, Doreen, students?
I was just in a way asking myself about in which way the protocols of participation or the process of decision making has been in a way proposed by you as an architects, or the group has established like the specific kind of decisions that want to be taken. I think it's interesting, these ideas of which kind of protocols or how we, in a way, give a structure to these processes.
Yeah, I didn't mention it so much. I know it's. Thank you for this question. That helps also to understand. The group was meeting every month, and so there were like 60 to 80 people in one room, which is not possible in the moment. And each decision had to be prepared like 2 weeks in advance. So it's a common rule we also adopted in this process. So everybody has time to be really clear of what is the decision about. But if the decision couldn't be made because somebody had a vote or like a veto against this decision-making moment, for instance, the external walkway was really a big issue with the glass stones, because there was once the cooperative was thinking, okay, let's get rid of this element because these ateliers don't need a second access to somewhere. You know, it's could be also like, and then we were just explaining the problems of legal constructions and fire rules and so on, but there could be also different ways, like there could be stairs and so on, and the people, they felt like, okay, there is not enough privacy. And so this process of negotiating this part of the building took 1 year to come to an end. And it is so you have like several fires lighting in the whole process. Some they are very, very on a low scale or on a small scale. They burn for like 1 year. And some are really, really strong, and then you have like a four weeks very strong debates. And it is another thing, like it's not like this community project we did before, like with 20 parties. Now we have like 70 parties in the whole building, and you see you have a totally different society. You have those who live on the rooftop, and they have problems of those who live on the rooftop, and you have people who live on the ground floor level. They have the problems of those who live on the ground floor level, and those who have a courtyard, they have the problem of having a neighbor. Now they have a problem of a neighborhood, and this is so interesting. So you decide yourself as a user or as somebody who's moving in these kind of processes, and you find out you will have a neighbor, and that is causing really, really problems. And so when you talk about the protocol, you have the official protocols, like once in a month we meet, and then the decision-making processes have to be prepared in advance. And then you have the individual consultancies with the apartments, like 2, 3, 4 times. It depends really on the ability of the future tenants to be able to decide. Some are very fast, some are not. You know that, and then you have these groups which you couldn't really control in the beginning, and then suddenly you have a debate on I don't have enough privacy in my courtyard. So what can I do? And then you have the very, I don't know, it's a very architectural but a very human way of talking about. You live in a next to a courtyard which is like 4 to 5 meters. It's even bigger than in Barcelona, the courtyards, which we were always referred to as like, hey, think about Barcelona, the very small courtyards, and they bring a light and air and whatever in. And then they were just really, really having a hard talk to the group. It's not that you are then part as an architect anymore. You just provide the infrastructure, you provide the idea, and you may you are maybe the guard for the process, but you're not deciding then anymore. And then the group was fighting to get their gels in front of the glass windows, and that had to be paid from the whole group. And that was really like this is like in real life. Somebody wants to get something because she thinks it's part of the game, and the others will argue against. But then in the end, they got their gels paid from the whole group, and it's so interesting that you have processes of what I would say. Some people said in the end it was like a seminar for democratic decision-making processes in the end, because that is the good point in co-housing project, and also maybe more than even in cooperative housing project, because in the cooperative housing project you have the CEOs, which are responsible for the decision in the end. Like in German law, it's like you have like 2 or 3 elected persons who are responsible to make decision in respect to the whole cooperative. But for the co-housing project, is you have an individual voice and an individual vote, so it's super based democratic. So in the end, you work with so many different individuals, but then they have once in a while they have to make a decision, and they can postpone the decision maybe 1 or 2 sessions. But then we have also project managers, and when they said like, okay, now you come in a dangerous situation. If you don't make the decision now, it will maybe cause some more extra time, and that is maybe something which the people really brings together. But also interestingly, this group was not a bottom-up group, which they knew each other before, but they learned each other from week to week, and now they're really like a strong group. And I think in the last sessions, I think it was 60 months, all these around like 5 years meetings we had. And I think from the meeting 50 on, we were feeling a bit like we don't want to be there anymore as architects. So we had, because we were blamed to, I don't know, anything. And then in the end we said like, okay, the group has learned so much about building, about decision-making process. They were so strong. We said we have to now take care about ourselves, and that we withdraw ourselves now, and that it's your. But it's interesting. It's that you you hand it to other people, the process, more and more.
Really interesting. Thank you, Christoph.
I have one last question, and then we can, after you finish, Christoph, we can take a short break before Christina's lecture. I wanted to ask you something about the use of drawings, and how our techniques, expertise, techniques are used in projects like that. I've seen you presenting before, and I've seen these wonderful drawings that inhabitants did for the R50. I've seen the kind of work that ifau has been doing, and also LACOL. I mean, I guess Christina will talk about it later. So because I'm also interested myself, but also because students quite often are dealing with projects like that. So they actually go and negotiate, they go and they talk with inhabitants in a specific neighborhood. So what kind of tools you have used, what kind of tools have you been trying, and how do you think the limits of our own profession somehow encounter questions of clarity when it comes to these roundtables of non-experts and inhabitants?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were some tools in terms of, for instance, the housing report, where the people could really document the way they live today. And there is the idea of an open floor plan, as which was not for the IBEB so open as for the R50 project, where the people could really build their own model and their drawings and the way, like you have a very a grid structure where they can do their remarks in, and you can interpret that as an architect. And I would say it's always a question of interpretation. So if a layman will draw something into a grid ordered floor plan and hand it back to you as a professional. So I think this is more like the way you talk about, and then you interpret it together again. So it's always so more interesting to have that in relation to a physical talk and a clear meeting you have with somebody. And otherwise, I would say it's about trust. Really, it's about trust, and it is openness. So if you are not working on the eye level, and you will just talk to the people and like many times in a way, oh, it has to be like this because the rules of architecture are like this, and the rules of the city and the rules of, I don't know, the building rules. The people get really fed up with this, and they say like, okay, you can do that once and two, because it's always about negotiation. You negotiate with the way you want to negotiate, in a way, what kind of spaces you want and can provide. Another way around is that the user is able also to restrict themselves, like in the group. This is also interesting because somebody is blaming the architect not to make enough investigation in terms of floor plan variety. And then you as an architect, okay, you wait, but then maybe there are others in the group who say how much variations you need. Is it, and what is the variation of a floor plan would give you maybe more possibilities to make a decision. So I think all these processes and the tools are within the group is making themselves up, you know, like it's what Christina was asking for. Like I was never thinking about like that works with a group of 90 parties, and then you have this split up in 7 subgroups with different interests, and so I was never thinking about that somebody could complain to be living on the roof, you know, and say, hey, come on, this is not a problem anymore. But now it will get hot, and then the people will walk by my apartment, and it's interesting to have all. And then you try to understand more what is maybe the main issue, the main problem. I don't know. It's but you're right. There are several different tools and also measurements of how you live in your old apartment, how you want to live in the next apartment, what kind of spaces you want to definitely be related to each other, like you want to have a master bedroom to the bathroom, or does it really, do you want to have more spaces for the individual because you are a family, or you want to live in one big loft space? I think these tools are existing in different ways, so you're totally right.
Great. Thank you so much. Shall we take a 10-minute break to stretch, to get a coffee and water, and then we start in 10 minutes with Christina?
Fantastic, yes.
That will be great. Thank you. Thank you for the audience.
Great. Thank you so much. 10 minutes. Let's be back in 10 minutes.
Okay.